All right, what's up everybody? So this is the follow-up Q&A to my 15K special. The way that these Q&As work, I like to go over this every time. I know I have a few new subscribers here since that video, thanks to pretty much entirely Alan Thrall, giving me a shout out. But basically, the way these work, if you have a question that you want to see answered in the next Q&A, it can be anything. Post it up in the comments of this video. Before I do my next Q&A, I'll go through all of these comments, heart all the ones that I like for questions, or anything that is upvoted pretty significantly. I will also make sure to include in the Q&A. So if you see a question that you also like, give it a thumbs up and I'm more likely to see it. I do go through all of them, but if a lot of people like a question, I'll be sure to include it. So with that said, let's get to the first question. The first one is from Habib is Best Man. Question for the next Q&A. Do you think spamming the same lift is better or having multiple variations of it is best? In my case, I do 6 sets of pull-ups per upper day, 2 times a week, and was wondering if it would be better to simply do only neutral grip or do neutral grip on one day and pronated on the other. By the way, congrats on the 15K. Basement, your channel is a hidden gem. I appreciate that, man. Thank you very much. So with this Q&A, a lot of these questions are programming and exercise selection related. So that tends to be something that's very individual. And I just want to say this before I get into the future questions. I'm going to not try and necessarily answer each question, but I'm going to talk about my thought process. So this video is basically just going to be me thinking out loud and take with that what you will. So if I'm programming pull-ups, so I would assume you're doing these lifts for the lats. If you're trying to train your lats and you're training twice a week, the way I would personally do it is if you're starting off, I would pick one variation for each day. And that way you can just start with one lift per muscle group. So if you're a new lifter or you're just finally learning how to lift properly, which is a lot of the case even if you've been lifting for a while, starting with one variation per day is a great way to go. Once you need more exercise selection per day to continue growing, and this is something that I would reserve until you build up those lifts the best that you can, specifically in terms of volume. So let's say you start off doing neutral grip pull-ups on Monday and then pronated pull-ups on Thursday, and you're doing 2 sets each. Let's say that works really well. Your lats are growing. The numbers are generally going up along with your growth in your actual lats. From here, what I would do is milk that out until your lats growth stalls. From here, my next fix would be to increase the volume a little bit. Whether it's just one day, bump one up to 3 sets or bump the other to 3 sets, or you go to both. Either one of those are fine options. The volume's already somewhat low to moderate, so you have room to improve. If you need to go above 3 sets per lift, I would probably just consider adding another variation. So what I would do at this point is maybe you go back to 2 sets on each lift instead of 3, but add 1, maybe 2 sets of another variation. So it's hard to say what exactly to do because a program isn't just something right now. It's something that needs to slowly build up and evolve as time goes on. That's generally my thought process with this. I would just get an assessment of where you're at and make the right decision from there. I hope something I said clicked with you. So next one from Balake Adkins. Is that from Key and Peele, Balake? I want to say it is. That it just brought back a memory from like 12 years ago. So he says, congrats on the channel growth. You've earned it with all the content you create for us. Much appreciated. Question for the next Q&A. Do you ever see yourself becoming a high volume pilled lifter? From my understanding, you keep sets relatively low in a training week and maximize what you can to get out of them, just not as extreme as the hip rows. Yeah, so I would say going to like a low to moderate volume. Low volume is HIT, so I'm definitely not a low volume person. I'd say I'm a lower side of moderate, so I'm still within the normal range for what I do and what my clients do. But this is a good question, and I would say I'm certainly open-minded to myself or other lifters being a high volume pilled lifter and have that mindset. The reason I say yes to that and the reason why I don't brush that answer off is because there might come a point where whether it's a specific person that responds well to high volume, or maybe I'll require higher volume when I'm 5 years older and I'm a more advanced lifter. I don't know these things yet. So the way that I like to see volume's a spectrum. Any amount of volume, not any amount, but any reasonable amount within the normal range of what the best lifters do can work. It's just a matter of what works for you at that moment and what you need to do to continue to grow. So for myself, I'll always be an advocate of minimize your volume where you can so you have room for other things. You see these people that spam volume all across the board, and you might say, oh, well, that person's just being anti-minimalist. Well, not necessarily, because that person is now forcing other things out of the program, where for somebody like myself, when I make my volume as efficient as I possibly can, and I'm not saying to be minimalist with volume, but when you can compact your volume and go as hard as you can and get great results from 1-2 sets per lift, usually 2, I don't want to say just 1, usually 2 sets per lift, that opens up more time and effort for other things. So that's actually, in a way, it's a maximalist way to train. I'm not just saying take everything you're doing and shrink it. You actually have room to add more where you need to other things, whether it's another variation for the same muscle, or it's just training another muscle group entirely, like calves and forearms, neck. People skip these all the time. Let's be real. So I can see myself becoming a high volume pilled lifter if I need to. If this low volume eventually runs out for me and I have no other option but to increase volume, then so be it. And that's why I'm not dogmatic about a certain volume amount, because it's just volume. It's just how much work you do. And everybody has to just do however much they need to grow optimally. That's how volume works. So I don't see a reason to pigeonhole yourself into something like HIT or higher volume training. It doesn't make a whole ton of sense when you think about it logically when you have experience lifting. Next question from Dushan 2504. Question for the next Q&A. What do you think is the best split besides upper lower for someone who can train 4 days a week and is not really crazy about the legs? With what would you pair leg training, and how many exercises per day would you have? Thanks a lot. Keep up the good work. So this is it's a bit of a vague question, but what I'd say for this question is, if you don't want to do upper lower, I would probably resort to a push-pull legs and then whatever else you need to do as far as what your priorities are. So if you do push-pull legs, of course you can keep legs at once a week if you want to. You don't even have to do that. But then you have another free day. So what I would do is do push-pull legs, and then you have this 4th day where you can throw in all your top priority muscle groups. So what I would do with this is either repeat a push or a pull. You could do an upper day. I know we're borderline getting to the upper lower split, but like theoretically speaking and programming wise speaking, if you were to go push pull legs upper, that would be the most like optimal way in programming to make your muscles grow. So with this, I would probably do that, but I know you want to stay away from upper lower. So I would do push pull legs and then pick one other day to spam your high priority muscle groups. If you want to do something else where you don't train the legs, I would do push, pull, and that is an excellent split. Very good split. The only modification I'd make to that is it's technically not push, pull. I would swap biceps and triceps, and then since you're doing upper body so many days in a row, I would probably take one day off between the push and the pull. So maybe push, pull Monday, Tuesday, rest Wednesday, push, pull Thursday, Friday, something simple like that. Just a minor detail, but I do think it's worth including if you are going to switch biceps and triceps. So next question from Tombstone. Congrats on the channel growth, Landon. I appreciate that, man. Q&A. What are your thoughts on getting the most out of lifting belts as a bodybuilder? I've noticed that you use a belt on movements with a lot of lower back involvement. I recently picked up a nylon quick locking weightlifting belt with the intention of improving fatigue management. I'm concerned about taking away my core stability by overusing it. I'm thinking of rotating the belt into my big lifts maybe every 2nd or 3rd week. So for hypertrophy's sake, I do love the use of the belt. I think it just adds another element of stability, and it gets rid of a weak link that you don't need to target, which is basically your core. Your core should be targeted, and when I say your core, it's a gimmicky word for abs. I can't speak for some reason, but whatever. I don't feel like editing that out. When it comes to eliminating a weak link, you want to do that at all costs. Whenever you can eliminate a weak link, go for it. So if you're doing heavy deadlifts or RDLs, use straps. If you're doing heavy deadlifts or RDLs, again, same example, use a lifting belt. This gets rid of your weaknesses, your grip and your core. It eliminates those two things entirely. And yeah, I know you said you're worried about overusing it and neglecting your abs, or maybe neglecting your forearms for a different example in a parallel universe with the forearm growth. You should be training those muscles directly anyways. So most of that core like stability, quote unquote, or the core strength or muscularity is going to be best developed through training your abs directly. So all I would do is just add in extra ab work, or even if you're already doing ab work, that's probably sufficient. You don't want to, when it comes to bodybuilding, you don't have to target everything through compound movements. I think everything should be isolated, not necessarily through an isolation lift, but it should be in some way, shape, or form a prime mover of some lift in your program, and that should cover it. So that's my thoughts on the lifting belt. I do love lifting belts. Next question from Alex. Congrats on 15K. Question for the next Q&A. Would it be considered program hopping if you swap a few exercises sometimes but keep the same movement pattern, at least from a hypertrophy point of view? For example, doing dumbbell press instead of barbell press, or machine rows instead of barbell rows. To answer this question, the way I see it is as simple as lifting might seem. It involves more coordination than you might think, and it's not because these lifts that we do in the gym are super complex and challenging, but with that said, getting the most you can out of every single set of every lift does require some skill, and I'm definitely a huge believer in that. So what I'd say is if you are going to make rotations between your lifts, one, you already said it, pick a similar variation, like a dumbbell to a barbell press. Those are going to be somewhat similar in some lifts. More importantly, I would focus on using lifts that you already have developed in your inventory. So if you're somebody that's mastered barbell and machine work, if you just want to like program hop to dumbbell stuff every now and then, that's not going to be very effective for you because you don't have that developed as a skill yet. So I would rotate through lifts that you're already good at and that you can already target that muscle precisely with. And I don't think that's an aspect to overlook. It's okay to rotate lifts, especially if you're training at two different gyms, or maybe you have a busy gym and you have to make rotations on the fly. Try and stick to stuff that you're already good at and stuff that you already know. And that's not to discourage you from trying to learn new lifts, but if you're just like every now and then throwing in, say, a dumbbell bench, maybe every 3 weeks or something, that's probably going to be a lot of wasted work because you're not doing it enough to learn it and master it and actually get good enough at it for it to be stimulative, but you are dedicating like an entire session to it every 3 weeks. And I think that would be a waste of time. So I'd say stick to what you know and slowly build up that inventory over time. Next question from Spike. Congrats on 15K. Thanks, man. In regards to the up-lower push-pull leg split you talked about, you do a push day with biceps immediately followed by a pull day with triceps. Do you not find the triceps to be fatigued from the prior day? And do you still do some of your back work for the lower body on the lower body day? So if it's a lower day in an upper-lower split, yes, I add back work because upper days are going to be too crammed trying to train every muscle in your back, every muscle in your delts, arms, chest, whatnot. It's just too much. So I do like to split those up a little bit. When it comes to training, yeah, like the biceps and triceps and the recovery aspect on a push-pull legs where you swap biceps and triceps on your push and pull days, I don't get any arm stimulation or any impact on recovery from torso movement. So if I'm training my back or my chest, I basically get nothing for my arms. And I think that was pretty evident through my first 5 years of lifting, where I basically had small arms and I had a pretty jacked back, and chest too, for that matter. It was pretty decent. So I think this can be individual. If you tend to be someone that's arm dominant, which is very rare, I'll definitely admit that, then it might not be the smartest idea, but you're probably going to be fine. Keep in mind, your arms aren't a primary mover on any lift for your chest or for your back. They're always a secondary mover. So technically, yeah, they're working, but they're not being trained hard enough to actually require some form of recovery in, I'd say, 99% of cases. So don't overthink that. You should be pretty much fine. Next question from Clay Bowman. A question for your next Q&A. I know you tend to prioritize very stable targeted movements like machines. What do you think of front squats, bent rows, and other movements that are limited by something other than the prime mover, especially when it's pulling from a recovery pool that is abundant? Is it ever worth it if there's something else you can do? I would say for this, I would never pick a movement for hypertrophy when the target muscle isn't the limiting factor. Any growth that you get from a muscle that isn't the prime mover of that lift is just bonus work. So For example, if you're able to grow like your lats or your forearms from deadlifting, then cool, but I wouldn't bank on it. I would include some type of forearm work and some type of direct lat work where those muscles are the prime movers. If they see growth from a movement where they're not the prime mover or the limiting factor, you're gambling on it, and I don't like to gamble. I don't think that's worth it. I don't see why everybody is so scared of just adding in a couple sets of isolation work or direct work for whatever muscle group you're trying to target. Don't play that hopeful game and hope everything gets hit. It's not worth it. As somebody that was brainwashed into thinking you didn't need to train your arms because they get trained through pressing and pulling movements, it took me like 2 years to make up lost progress. It really isn't worth it. I could have just done arm work instead. Like I could have just done arm work and I would have been fine. You'll be the same here. So what I'd say is try to include some type of movement where those target muscles are going to be the prime mover, and you should be good. You don't want to take risks. If you're going to be in the gym anyways, make it happen. So what I'd say. Next question from, I'm not going to try and read that one. If I had a PR in a lift, let's say incline fly press, should I keep it in that PR rep and weight zone until I hit PRs in other movements that day, which are affected by that movement, for example, French press? Or should I keep pushing further in that movement, even if it slows down my progress on that other movement? I'm in early to middle, intermediate. Congrats on 15K. This channel, along with others, has really helped my progress. So much appreciated. Thank you. I'm glad it's helped your progress. So never purposely steer shy of failure and pushing yourself on a specific lift just to let another lift move up if it's in your program in this situation. So with this, a lot of the time you have to take the context of the program into account when you're looking at your progression on a specific lift. So for example, if you're doing, let's say, a push-pull leg split, if you're doing a push day and you do 3 movements for the chest, an overhead press for the shoulders, more shoulder isolation, and then you do your tricep work, your triceps are going to be pretty fatigued. 1, because it's at the end of the session, and 2, because they've been a secondary mover in a lot of lifts before that. So if your tricep lifts aren't moving up that fast, first I would just restructure the program because they're probably not being trained optimally. But at the same time, let's say for your chest, if you're doing like a flat variation, let's say just a regular flat machine, Smith machine press, and then let's say you have an incline Smith machine press, never sacrifice that first lift and hold back just so you can get the second lift moving. This is always going to be fixed through programming. So it could be something where you need to have another variation. Maybe they're too closely connected and it might be a little bit redundant, but at the same time, you can't just expect everything to move up all the time. So if you have multiple lifts for one muscle in a day, you can't just get better at everything because, yeah, let's say your first lift is Smith bench and it's progressing. Yeah, you're progressing on that. So why wouldn't you be like progressing on anything else? Well, with that progression, you're building more fatigue. So even if you're maintaining your numbers in the lifts that you have after that, you have to keep in mind that each time you do that, as your first lift progresses, you're training those lifts and matching performance at that matter in a more fatigued state every single week. So that's something to keep in mind. I find that in my experience, most of my lifts do tend to progress in the program, but it's always going to be at different rates. So don't expect everything to be like, all right, add 1 rep this week, add 1 rep next week, everything's linear, everything moves up at the same time. Go all out on what you have. If something feels like it's redundant, probably just change the programming or remove it entirely. And that's what I'd say for that. Next question is from Strategically Wild. I like the name. Question for the next Q&A. How important is it that weight gain happens smoothly / evenly when bulking? For example, I try to gain about 0.5 pounds per week, but it ends up being a few weeks of more rapid gains than some plateaus. I find it really hard to ensure it happens gradually. How much does this matter? So in a perfect world, you would be able to gain 0.5 pounds a week consistently. The problem is the world isn't perfect. So your rate of weight gain, even if it's as high as 0.5 pounds per week, which is decently high in my opinion, at that rate, fluctuations are going to put that so far behind the smoke that you can't even see what's really happening. So what I would say is take your average of each week and make sure it's generally trending up. I would take your average weight of each month and compare that month over month. If you mess up your bulk for 1 month and you're 7 months into bulking and you only gain 1 pound instead of 2, that is such a small issue that it's almost a non-issue. 1 month is more than enough time to correct it, but it's not so long to where you're just wasting your bulk. So I'd say measure your averages each week, measure your averages each month, and basically make sure that you're trending up in the right direction. If you don't have a body weight chart with a trend line, that's what I'd recommend. So if you go on Google Sheets, what I would do is make a chart where you can plug in your body weights for each day and put in a moving average. I'd say do like an 8 or 10 day moving average, and that should be totally fine. Use that as your trend line to make sure that it's generally moving up over time, and that way it gets rid of the volatility and it smooths it out because, of course, it's an average. So that's definitely what I would do for you. Next question from Hardest Shard. Question for next Q&A. I always do 4 hard sets per muscle group per session on push-pull legs, and I'm seeing some decent progress, nowhere near a plateau. Almost everyone at my gym does 3 sets per exercise and a minimum of 3 exercises per muscle. Am I leaving gains on the table? For example, ME chest, not sure what ME means, but chest, 4 sets of incline press, and maybe sometimes a flat dumbbell burner set. ME, that's me. I'm an idiot. And then X, chest equals 3 sets of flat bench, 3 sets of incline, 3 sets of decline. So yeah, what I'd say for you is, from somebody that has experience with programming for other people and lifting for myself, your program makes a lot more sense. The one benefit that they might have is they have more variation than you. What I would ask yourself is, who's seeing better growth? Are you seeing better growth, or are they seeing better growth? Do you guys generally have the same like effort levels and proximity to failure? And is your weekly volume how does your weekly volume and how does your per session volume compare? It wouldn't, when frequency is taken into account, of course. So yeah, what I'd say for you, who's growing better? I would say if they're growing better, it's probably due to the variation more than it is the volume. So what I'd say is you could try 2 sets of flat, 2 sets of incline, and 1 set of decline, or 2 sets of flat, 1 on incline, 1 on decline, and see if that works. A little variation is always better for this specific example, I'd say. But yeah, examine what their progress is. Compare yourself. I'm not somebody that's against comparing yourself to others. I think this is a perfect example where you should be comparing yourself to others. If you're making better gains, they could learn something from you. And if they are making better gains, you could learn something from them. Next question from Turo302. So the thing I always wonder, even almost 3 years into lifting now, is when people say you should be improving your lifts by a rep or weight, etc. every week. But does this mean every exercise in my workout needs to improve every week? Still don't get that. So this is just classic fear mongering. I can't stand how much pressure the community, not so much anymore, but this used to be so bad like 5 years ago, where people would just be pressured so much into adding weight and adding reps every week that they would just stick to squat, bench, deadlift and ignore everything else because they didn't think they could make progress because they weren't adding reps and weight every week. And I know looking back, hindsight's 20/20, it's fairly obvious that's not the best way to train. It's very clear now, but it wasn't so clear 5 years ago. So what I'd say for this is progressing every lift every week is, it's a pipe dream. It's not a real thing. The way that I want to break this down, just to give you a bit of a new perspective, is your body doesn't work. Your body doesn't know what reps are. Your body doesn't know what the weight is. It's not like, oh, okay, successful session, we added 1 rep and we can do that next week. Like, it's not that straightforward. It's not a game. It's not like, oh, I unlocked another rep because I had a good workout. Everything will vary a little bit. What if you can get a quarter of a rep? Is that progress? Is that good enough progress? Nobody knows. These are all things that generally trending up in your reps is a good correlation of building muscle in that prime mover of that lift. I would leave it at that. Don't stress too much. The funny thing about this is, when I stopped caring so much about my strength and I just focused on technique, proximity to failure, and stimulus, I got stronger on basically every lift aside from the lifts that I was using extreme leverages on to artificially progress back in my power building days. So don't overthink this. And when I say don't overthink this, I genuinely mean don't overthink it. Not don't worry about it, not don't stress about it. Don't overthink it. Don't think about it too much. Don't think about it so much that you lose yourself in the process is what I'd say. So that's my answer for you there. Next question from Ian Graham White. My gym has only 3 adjustable benches with no 70 to 75 degree incline, 15 degrees, 30, 45, 60, or 90 degree only. Would setting one of them at a 90 degree incline and placing a 45-pound plate onto the front of the bench to help get me the proper angle for seated anterior delt pressing, or would using a 60 degree incline work fine? I think a 60 degree incline would work fine. This is going to be a lot of front delts anyways. Even a standard incline bench press when you're at 45 degrees is a lot of front delts too. If you're at 60, it's still going to be front delts and a little bit of upper chest as the prime mover. I think 60 would be totally fine. If you want to experiment with the setup of trying to get closer to 75 degrees by putting a plate under the front of the bench, you could definitely do that too. I can't imagine that would be quite enough, and you do definitely want to make sure that it's still a stable enough setup to where you're not risking getting injured on that lift, especially since it is going to be a free moving bench. So I would personally settle for the 60 degree and be fine with that, but it's totally up to you. Since it is a lower incline, I wouldn't ditch your side delt isolation work in hopes that that lift can be the solution for your side delts. Since it's a lower incline, you are taking a little bit more of a risk with the side delts. I would just, if you have side delt isolation, don't ditch that at all is what I'd say. Next question from Tiernan. Is there any particular time of day you should work out? Like, are you better off working out on an empty stomach in the morning or in the afternoon when you've already eaten 1 or 2 meals? So what I'd say for this is meals I find matter for some people and they don't matter for others. One thing that I do think is pretty consistent for most people is the time of day they train, and take meals out of it. Just for this example, some people are morning people and they function good in the morning. They wake up and they're ready to go and they're exhausted in the afternoon. I'll never understand these people, but they absolutely exist, and I think a lot of people are like this. These people are best lifting in the morning. Whether you have a quick breakfast before or even train fasted, in my experience, I've done about everything. I've had day jobs where I work all day. I get to the gym at like 8:30 p.m. and I'm good to go. I train till 10. The front desk gym workers are bugging me to get out, but I always stayed. This is back when I was younger. I've also done the same thing where I've been an adult with a 9-hour shift during the day, and I've trained at 6 a.m. and I'm yawning between every set. So for me personally, I was able to train fasted in the morning, even as a non-morning person, but it wasn't optimal. There's no way that my effort levels and my mental focus were where they needed to be optimal for muscle growth. So for me personally, I'm awake at night. I film my videos at night because if I film them in the morning, I'm just so out of it. I'm like a zombie. It just doesn't work. So even if you think I'm monotone now and kind of boring right now, this is me on like my highest gear. So I hope you appreciate that. Basically what I'm trying to say is everybody has a time of day where they feel most awake. This isn't really something you have to experiment with. This is something you can reflect on. When are you most productive? When are you most passionate? For me, it's anytime after like 4 or 5 p.m. I'm a zombie all day. I'm mentally sharp, so that's when I do like all of my client communication and programming and that kind of stuff, because I can do mental work and just sit on my couch and get all that stuff done and be good at it. Later in the day, that's when I get creative, and that's when my like physical energy starts to come in. So when I lift, I prefer for it to be after 4 or 5 p.m. And if I'm going to do some more creative work, like filming a video for this channel or doing a Q&A, I like for it to be later at night because that's just when I function best. So I would encourage you to keep an eye on how you feel throughout the day, but also, more importantly, like we've all been alive for a long time. Just reflect on how you generally are as a person. When are you most at your physical peak? And you can pretty much find that out just from reflecting. Next question from Yutter. Why do I feel late in bodybuilding? It feels like every time I look at someone, they are jacked or strong, and I feel late and left out. That is life, my man. That's how that works. I mean, the world is a constant rotation of people. So you can't just expect to be ahead when someone else got there before you. Like when I'm 24, I can't just look at people that are 34 and be like, I feel left out. Like you'll be 34 one day. I'll be 34 one day. I got jacked. I wasn't 10 years ago. You can do the same thing. It's like everybody just has to go at their own time. That's just how life works. Very straightforward. But I do understand the FOMO that you're experiencing. So with this, I don't want to say it. I'm not going to give you that corny advice, even though it's like the easy answer. I'm going to try and think about this for another second. So if you feel left out and you feel like you're late, how do I answer this the best that I can? I would say use that as your motivation. Don't let yourself have that feeling anymore. That's one of the worst feelings, to know that you could be somewhere and that you aren't there. So use this as motivation to prove yourself wrong. You're somebody that maybe procrastinated on working out, or you just like maybe didn't discover it in time, and that's a very normal thing too. Prove yourself wrong. You have this inner voice that's telling you that you should feel left out, or you're late, or you didn't come in at the right time to lifting. Prove that voice wrong by lifting and getting as jacked as you can. That's my 2 cents for you there. And is that the last one? That was the last question that I hearted. So with that said, if you guys have any questions you want to see answered in the next video, definitely let me know in the comments here. If it's a good question, I'll probably answer it. I can't answer all of them, so there are always a few good questions that I miss too, unfortunately. And if you see any other questions that you like, that you think is a good question, give it an upvote, give it a thumbs up, and that way I'm more likely to see it and include it. So with that said, all I got. I'll see you guys in the next video.